Um, just remember all participants are muted. This session is being recorded. All materials, including the recording, will be put on the NADTC website. Closed captioning is available, and you can turn on captioning and subtitles by clicking the CC button. Please put your questions in the Q&A area by using the Q&A button. And chat is open. You can use it for general comments or if you need technical assistance. So everything's set up and ready to go. Our session today will be me as Ken Thompson, Technical Assistance Director of the East Fields and NADTC. And I'll give you a little bit of overview shortly on what the NADTC is. And we also want to welcome our presenters, Jeremy Matson, PhD, Assistant Professor and part of the Small Urban and Rural Center on Mobility at the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute at North Dakota State University. And with him is Ranjit Godvarti, PhD, Assistant Professor and Associate Research Fellow at the Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute at North Dakota State University. Then at the end, we're going to do a facilitated discussion with your questions, and I look forward to that too. So we'll move ahead. Just a little description of the National Aging Disability Transportation Center, the NADTC. Our mission is to promote the availability of accessible transportation options that serve the needs of older adults, people with disabilities, caregivers, and communities. And our major objectives are to provide person-centered technical assistance and information to answer anything you have or issues that you want some assistance with. We provide training. We have a very communication outreach effort with website with all kinds of materials and resources. We work to promote coordination and partnerships with a variety of organizations. And we also promote that organizations invest in community solutions to resolve issues around transportation so that you find solutions that work best for you. All right, next slide. All right, so we're going to start now with our two presenters with the Tribal Transit Study. So Jeremy, Ranjit, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Ken. So we're going to talk about a study that we finished earlier this year. It's called the Tribal Transit Study, Demographic Needs, Indicators, Funding Needs, and Livability. Go to the next slide. So like I said, we published this earlier this year. Ranjit and I were co-authors on this, along with Elvis Ndembe, who was actually the lead author. So some of this I'm going to show was stuff that he prepared, and Jill Haug. So some things we'll talk about include population densities and demographics in tribal areas and why that's important. Talk a bit about trends in funding and operating statistics for tribal transit. And then Ranjit's going to talk about a couple of livability case studies that we did. Previously, we had done a study, similar study, did a couple of case studies for different rural communities. And then we also did a national survey. And then now we followed it up with these case studies for a couple of tribal communities. So he'll talk about that. We looked at factors that affect the livability, what's the quality of those livability factors in those communities. And he'll show those results and also compare them to results that we did from the national survey. Next slide. So first, to talk about population densities in areas with Native American populations. So I looked at counties that have high concentrations of Native American populations. So for example, those counties that have at least 15% Native American population, they have a population density of 13 people per square mile. And as you increase that population of Native Americans, like if it's more than 45%, then you see a population density of just 6 people per square mile. So that's pretty low population density. If we look at the table on the next slide, we can see population densities for counties across the United States. So there's the RUCC code is a rural urban continuum code that ranks all the counties in the country on a scale from 1 to 9, where 1 is the most urban counties, 9 is the most rural. So you can look at the most rural counties, 8 and 9, they have population densities of around 12 or 6 in the most rural. So we see then that those counties with a high concentration of Native American populations are among the most rural, lowest population density counties in the country. And that creates challenges for providing transit services because of the longer travel distances, the geographic dispersion of origins and destinations. So it's more challenging to provide transit services, and it can be more costly. Next slide. But there's a need for transit in these tribal communities, and we can see that by looking at the demographics. If we look at, these are demographic groups that typically have greater need for transit services, particularly in rural areas, the senior citizens, the school-age youth, people with disabilities, low-income persons, households without automobiles. So I looked at, in tribal areas and reservations, the percentage of population that belongs to these demographic groups, which you can see on the next slide. I compared the populations of each of those demographic groups in the reservation lands to the national averages, as well as to the rural averages across the country. So if we first look at the age 5 to 17, the school age youth, nationally it's 17% of the population. Rural areas, it's also 17%. In the reservation, it's a little bit higher, it's 21%. And look at the senior citizens, the age 65 plus, nationally it's 15%. It's higher in rural areas at 19%. On the reservations, though, it's slightly lower than the national average at 14%. So a lot of the discussion about need for transit in rural areas is based on a lot of discussions about the aging population, aging in place, the high concentration of older adults in some rural areas. And that does create a need for transit in rural areas. But in reservations, it's not the senior population as much as it is the other population groups. The population with a disability, it's about the same on the reservations as in rural areas. But then the population below the poverty level, nationally it's 14%, 12% in rural areas, but it's 28% on the reservations. And of course, there's variations between tribal communities. Some places it's much higher than that. And if you look at households with no vehicles, 9% nationally. In rural areas, it's just 4%. There's a much greater reliance on the automobile in rural areas. On the reservations, it's 9%. So it's much higher than it is in other rural areas. And as we talked about before, these are rural, very rural, low population density areas. So there's a greater reliance on the automobile. So we can see that, you know, if we focus just on the older adult population, and if we base, say, funding decisions based on that, then we're overlooking the need for transit in tribal communities, which is based on the higher levels of poverty, higher levels of households without vehicles, and also a higher percentage of school-aged youth. Next slide. So these are all the tribal areas across the country. The green is where there is a tribal transit system. The red is where there isn't. But the red areas may have other transit services available, but the green shows where there's the tribal transit systems funded by the 5311C program. Next slide. And we can see where this is the federal funding through the 5311C program for 2013 to 2017. So you can see where that funding has gone, you know, upper Midwest, Dakotas, Oklahoma, Southwest, Pacific Northwest, a little bit in some eastern areas. Next slide. So then that's the federal funding, and that creates the majority, or close to 2/3 of the funding of the tribal transit is from the federal sources. Most of the rest is from local sources. The next slide shows you go to the next slide. This is the distribution of local funding for tribal transit across the country. So some areas that had, like the Dakotas, don't have much local funding. And go to the next slide. We can also look at the distribution of tribal transit trips across the country. A lot in the Southwest, same areas. There's a few Eastern systems that have a lot of ridership. Next slide. and then also the distribution of vehicle revenue miles across the country. Just go to the next slide. So there is tribal transit systems across the country, but I think there is still a need for additional services. And these are just some estimates that I made of household travel behavior in areas that have higher concentrations of Native American populations compared to rural averages. And these are just estimates because I don't have actual data for this, but it's estimated based on geographic and demographic characteristics. So based on these estimates, it looks like the person miles, person trips, vehicle miles, vehicle trips are all a little bit lower in the Native American, the areas with a higher concentration of Native American populations compared to rural numbers nationally. So it suggests there is a need for some more transportation services. Next slide. And this shows trends in tribal transit ridership and the number of agencies over the last 10, 11 years. So we saw that there was an increase in both the number of agencies and the ridership from 2009 up to 2015, corresponding with increases in funding through SAFETY-LU and MAP 21 and the FAST Act. And then we saw over the last few years, it's leveled off, a little bit decreased the last couple of years in ridership, which follows a national trend, actually. So we see a leveling off in ridership in the number of agencies, and it'd be interesting to see the data for 2020. I don't have that yet, but to see how much ridership may have decreased. So I'll go to the next slide. And then Ranjit's next going to talk about these case studies that we did on livability in the 2 reservations. And go ahead, Ranjit.
Yeah, hi. So we have conducted 2 case studies to study exclusively tribal communities. So for the case studies, we have selected a Standing Rock Reservation, which is towards the right. It is a big reservation that is spanned over between North Dakota and South Dakota. And the second case study that we have selected is Makah Indian Reservation. It is towards the bottom left. It is a small reservation when compared to Standing Rock. So these are 2 case studies we have selected for studying the livability. So we wanted to ask questions to the respondents, to the residents and transit riders within these communities to understand the livability, what are the various factors that affect livability, and how does transportation and public transit contributes towards the livability. So when we say livability, we have identified factors and then multiple factors that contributes to livability, and we have asked the respondents to rank them. How important are they for a typical community, and how important what is the quality of that factor within your community? I'll show results of some of these in a bit. Next slide, please. So before I get into the case studies, a quick look into the demographics of these 2 case study communities that we have selected, Standing Rock and Makah tribe, and comparing them with the United States demographics. So for the youth population, population age 5 to 9, if you see the United States average is 50%, 20%, and if you look at the averages for Standing Rock and Makah tribe, it is 29 for Standing Rock and Makah tribe 24. It is higher than the national average. And like Jeremy mentioned, this is one of one of the factor that we could take into account for understanding the transit needs. And looking at the population age 65 or older, United States average is 15%, and if you look at Standing Rock and Makah tribe, it is 9%, which is lower than the US average. And looking at the population below the poverty level, the average for the US is 15%, and if you see Standing Rock and Makah tribe, it is higher than 15%. For Standing Rock, it is as high as 42%. Makah tribe, it is 24%. So you can see the population below the poverty level is higher for these 2 case study communities that we have selected. And if we just look at like Jeremy was mentioning, if we just look at population age 65 or older to determine the mobility needs, we might be overlooking the mobility needs for transit services. So looking at the youth population and population below below the poverty levels for these two communities definitely could help us understand there is definitely a need for transportation and transit services in these communities. Next slide, please. So for these two case studies, we have conducted surveys with the residents as well as the transit riders. So for the Standing Rock, we have worked with multiple stakeholders within these communities to gather our responses. So for Standing Rock, we have gathered a total of 163 responses. And for Makah Tribe, we gathered a total of 100 responses. Next slide. So one of the questions that we have also asked is, we asked if the respondent is living on the reservation or not to understand the reasons why some of the respondents don't live on the reservation. So if you see the top reasons for Standing Rock as reasons not living on the reservation, you could see lack of affordable housing, lack of shopping and entertainment option. Crime is one of the major reason in Standing Rock, lack of available jobs, and enrollment, lack of parks and recreation, and so forth. So if you see the top 3 or 4, affordable housing, lack of affordable housing, shopping and entertainment options, available jobs, and crime. And you'll see the same trend in the Makah Tribe as well. So for the Makah Tribe, lack of available jobs, lack of affordable housing, and then lack of shopping and entertainment options. So you see these as a common reason for residents not living on the reservation when we kind of so here, I mean, crime is not an issue in Makah Tribe here, but Standing Rock Reservation, crime is one of the factor for respondents not living on the reservation. Next slide. So like I was mentioning, we have asked each respondent initially, we have identified what are the various livability factors that we should be studying. So you see a list of livability factors on this graph towards the left, such as quality healthcare, affordable housing, quality public schools, affordable transportation options, available jobs, low crime, clean environment, overall cost of living, traffic safety, and so forth. So these are various factors that we have identified contribute towards the livability of a community. So we have asked a question of, we asked the respondents to rate the importance of various of these factors towards livability in a typical community. So we have, so if you see, we have 2 bars in the graph, the green one and the yellow one. So the green one is the responses for Standing Rock, and the yellow one is, we have, like Jeremy was mentioning, we have conducted a national survey of a similar national survey studying the livability factors for metro, non-metro residents. So we are comparing these responses to non-metro residents, which are typically rural respondents, rural communities. So we want to compare the responses of the tribal of the Standing Rock respondents to non-metro residents. So for each of these livability factors, we asked to rate the livable importance on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being very important. So if you see the various livability factors and their importance towards a typical community, you could see if you are looking at the green bars, you could see that most of the livability factors are considered important by Standing Rock respondents, such as if you look from top to bottom, quality healthcare, affordable housing, quality public schools, affordable transportation options, available jobs, low crime. So all of these are rated very important. If you see, it's all of them have an average of more than 4.5 till overall cost of living, and rest of them are also rated important. I mean, not as high as the other ones, but then they're also considered important. But if you look at the yellow bars, those are the national averages for non-metro residents. So if you see Standing Rock respondents mentioned all of these livability factors are important when compared to national average of non-metro residents. Next slide, please. Similarly, the results are here for Makah Tribe. Again, you see towards the left the various factors that we have identified as livability factors, and then we ask Makah Tribe respondents to rate the importance of these livability factors, and you see the responses of Makah Tribe respondents as well as comparison to national survey results from the non-metro residents. So you could see for Makah tribe, some of the important factors that are mentioned are affordable housing, quality healthcare, quality public schools, overall cost of living, clean environment. If you remember, I think there is a common trend of housing, healthcare, public schools, and cost of living being some of the important livability factors for both Standing Rock and Makah tribe communities. So in comparison, if you see, can you go to the previous slide, please? Yeah, so if you want to look at the differences between non-metro residents as well as compared to the Standing Rock respondents, if you see affordable transportation options are considered more important in Standing Rock community when compared to typical metro areas. And if you see a different other difference, if you look at the cultural institutions are considered more important by the tribal community of Standing Rock. So the next slide, I think you'll see a similar trend here. Cultural institutions are considered important, comparatively more important when compared to non-metro residents for the Makah respondents. So you could see a huge gap between those two comparisons. Next slide, please. So the first question we asked, like, what is the importance of each of the livability factor in a typical community? And then we have asked the next question, which is, okay, what is the quality of these livability factors in your community, in your tribal community? So here we have rated these qualities on a scale of 1 to 5. So you could see the quality of livability factors for the Standing Rock reservation. The green one being the Standing Rock responses and the yellow one being the national average for non-metro residents. So if you look at the results here, the quality of various of these livability factors, most of the livability factors is less than the national average. And if you see the only difference for Standing Rock community has a higher quality for affordable transportation option when compared to national average for non-metro residents. So apart from that, the quality of various of these livability factors is poor in Standing Rock reservation. Next slide, please. And I think we'll see a similar trend in Makah tribe, although some of these factors are not as low as in Standing Rock community. So the quality of livability factors in Makah tribe, you could see that two of the qualities that are mentioned as higher than the national average is sense of community is at a better quality when compared to national average, and cultural institutions are also at a better quality. And if you see affordable transportation option is also at a better quality in Makah tribe, and rest of them there is definitely a gap. Next slide, please. So here, I think this graph combines the two questions we have asked. If you see the light, if you're looking at the affordable housing option towards the top, there are two bars. One is a light green and one is a dark green. So the light green is the quality of affordable housing towards livability in a typical community, and the dark green is light green is the importance of affordable housing in a typical community, and the dark green is the quality of affordable housing in Standing Rock. So you could see that the respondents think that affordable housing is very important, but then the quality of affordable housing is very low in Standing Rock, and you could see a gap which shows that there is need for improving affordable housing in Standing Rock reservation to improve the livability. Similarly, you see various of these livability factors: available jobs, low crime, quality healthcare, clean environment, and so forth. So there is definitely a lot of gap for all of these livability factors, and improving these factors could improve the overall livability in Standing Rock reservation. And among the top, you could see affordable housing, available jobs, low crime, quality healthcare are the top ones with more needs. Next slide, please. Same slide here for Makah tribe. Again, you could see a huge gap between the importance of various livability factors versus the quality in the Makah tribe community. Affordable housing, available jobs, overall cost of living, shopping and entertainment options, quality healthcare. You could see some of the common factors that are lacking in quality in both the tribal communities here as well. Next slide, please. So similarly, we have also asked a question about transportation factors in Standing Rock. So what is the importance of various of these factors, such as roads in good condition, walkability, low traffic congestion, bikeability, public transit services? So what is the importance of various of these factors, and what is the quality of these factors within their community? And similar to the previous graph, you could see what is the importance for each of these factors, as well as the quality. There is definitely a gap. And you could see the top one being the roads in good condition. It is considered as very important towards a important transportation factor, but then they lack in the quality. So there is poor quality roads in Standing Rock Reservation when compared to the rest of these. Next slide, please. I think we'll see the same trend here as well. Roads in good condition, blacks is in poor quality in Makah tribe as well. There is a huge gap. So improving the roads could improve the the livability is what we could take away. But I mean, if you see low traffic congestion, they are in a better quality because there is not a lot of traffic congestion in Makah tribe, but if you see a gap in these graphs between the dark green and light green, that is where there is need to improve these various factors. Next slide, please. So we also asked a few more questions. One of the question is satisfaction of the quality of life in community. And here you could see the results for Makah Reservation in dark green bar, Standing Rock Reservation in light green bar, and yellow, which is a national average. You could see typically if you're looking at the dark green bar, which is Makah Reservation, most of the respondents are very satisfied, or neither satisfied or dissatisfied. If you're looking for Standing Rock Reservation, the light green bar, a significant number of respondents mentioned they are very satisfied or satisfied, but then there are also a decent number of responses who said they are dissatisfied or very dissatisfied. Again, you could compare these values with the yellow bars, which are the national averages. So we also asked, is it important for public transit to be available to my community residents? And most of the respondents from both the communities, Makah and Standing Rock, mentioned that public transit is important to be available for the community residents. Next slide, please. So we ask this question exclusively for transit riders. So public transit is very important to my quality of life, and you could see a lot of for Makah tribe respondents in dark green. Most of the respondents mentioned it is neutral, but then there are some who mentioned they agree or strongly agree to the statement. On the other hand, for Standing Rock respondents, most of the transit riders felt that public transit is very important for their quality of life. You could see most of them mentions either strongly agree or agree that it is important. Next slide, please. So here, I think this picture shows, again, this is based on a question asked to transit riders. The question goes like, if public transit were not available, would you make the same number of trips? So what impact does the public transit have on the transit riders? So if you're looking at the Standing Rock picture, 39% in the green shadow one, 39% of the respondents would make the same number of trips. But if you see the red ones here, 15% of the riders would not make the trip that they currently make using public transit, and 17% they'll make somewhat fewer trips. 30% they will make a lot fewer trips. So these are the trips that would be foregone if public transit is not available. Looking at the other side for the Makah tribe, half of the riders mentioned they would make the same number of trips, but there are other half who would not make the trips, or who would make somewhat or a lot fewer trips if public transit is not available. Next slide, please. So in summary, based on the demographic findings and based on the case studies that we have conducted, low population densities, if you see tribal communities have low population densities, and low population densities create challenges in providing transportation options because of the spread out nature and tribal communities, and the demographic data that is shown definitely indicate there is a need for transit. There is a higher percentage of youth population with in poverty levels, and population who is car dependent within the tribal communities, and they demand the need for transit. And the number of tribal transit systems and ridership has plateaued, as as shown by Jeremy in one of his graph. So in the recent times, and there are various number of factors that contribute to livability based on the findings of the case studies. And transportation does play a key role towards livability in these communities. I think that should be the end of the presentation. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us. And we have the report of this study published. So please go to our website if you want to access the full report.
All right, thank you, Jeremy and Ranjit. Now we're open up for your questions. So please put your questions into the Q&A section, and so we can answer your questions. Got one question in here that maybe you can address. A question is, how would you recommend finding and connecting with tribal communities?
Do you have any thoughts on that, Ranjit? You kind of worked with the tribal communities in the case studies that we did. I know some of them. Yeah, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so when we are conducting the case studies, we wanted to reach out to tribal communities to see if they wanted to participate. So what we have done is we reached out to the states that that has a decent number of tribal communities. There is a tribal liaison for each when you contact the state DOT. So I think getting hold of tribal liaison within the state could help provide more contacts. So I think that was very successful for me. Reach out to state DOT and ask for a tribal liaison for the state, and then they could help you help you connect with multiple contacts within each of the tribal community.
And we've participated in the National Transportation and Indian Country Conference the last few times and made some contacts through that conference as well.
Yep.
All right. And another question would be, with these results of the study, or was there anything surprising, or is this something that the results that you got are something you expected from the beginning?
Or do you want to talk about the livability results, Ranjit? I think it's kind of expected. I mean, the ones that were most important, like schools and housing and healthcare, cost of living, we kind of expect those to be the most important. And we've seen that in other case studies and national surveys that we've done as well. And I think we thought that the quality might be, the perceived quality of some of those factors might be lower in some tribal communities. And we definitely saw that specifically in Standing Rock. I think maybe it was a little surprising the extent to which they gave lower ratings in Standing Rock. But then they also gave a higher rating for affordable transportation options, so they rated that as being higher. So that was maybe a little surprising. Did you have anything you want to add?
I think I was interested to see that the quality of public transportation in Standing Rock is rated as higher by the respondents. Typically, I think it is when you compare it to the national averages, there is public transit service, but then there's not enough. But then the quality of the available public transit service is rated higher, which I thought is good because there is definitely a need.
Good. So when you're looking at transportation, you're looking at it from the livability standpoint. You know, a lot of times people look at transportation about who's getting rides, where they're going, but why is it important that we look at livability from as a starting point when you look at transportation to kind of connect, what are those issues, around livability and transportation?
Yeah, and it really impacts an individual's quality of life. So we've done some analysis that showed that how easy it is to travel within your community, how easy it is to get to work, to healthcare, to shopping, wherever you need to go or wherever you want to go. That affects the community livability. And that's impacted by the quality of the transit service, as well as the quality of roads and walkability and all that. That impacts how easy it is to access things within your community. And we've seen that affects how people rate the quality of life in their community. And how they rate the quality of life in their community is also related to their overall life satisfaction or overall well-being. So if you're more satisfied with the quality of life in your community, you'll have an overall higher life satisfaction or overall well-being. So it really impacts the individual's well-being.
So it really shows the key, good transportation or usable transportation and quality of life can be separated, especially in these areas where,
Yeah.
there's very few options. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Very good. I would just tell anybody on this session here that we're still waiting. If you want to put in some questions, put them in the Q&A section so we can get to that. And then we can try to answer anything that's on your mind. So another question we have, how does the level of transit service in tribal communities compared to transit in other rural areas across the United States? So, you did some comparisons of non-metro, but tribal, and you take a look at transit, how does it compare, just going to rural or very rural areas?
Yeah, that's something that I tried to look at in the study, and we did see that there was an increase in tribal transit agencies over a number of years, and a pretty good increase in ridership. So I tried to look at in those tribal communities how much service is available, how many trips they're providing, and compare that to other rural areas across the country. And it's hard to get really good data on that. Some places they do have pretty good service. Other places it's really lack of service. And we see that for rural transit in general as well. There's some places that really have a lack of service. My sense is that the tribal communities have maybe a little poorer service in many areas. But again, it was hard to get good data on that. One thing that I did do for another study a couple of years ago was I tried to look across the country and look at not just counties, but kind of finer geographic areas and see where there is service and where there isn't. And then, so I compared what I found from the tribal areas or reservations to rural areas in general. And there was, there looked to be a little less service in the reservations as compared to rural areas in general. And that's kind of what my sense is, though it's really hard to get really good data on that.
Okay. So it's just difficult to kind of really do a true comparison based on data, and maybe in different areas, people track different things around their transit systems or their what they provide. So maybe you can't really compare it directly. Is that correct, you think?
Yeah.
All right, I got another question here that's in the actually in the chat box. It says, after conducting this study, what would be the next study to focus more on?
Well, I'll say like one thing from this study, I guess, those livability factors that we asked them about, those were the same as what we used in other studies, other rural case studies in the national survey. We didn't, there may be some other livability factors that are more important specifically for tribal communities that we overlooked. So that would be something to look at. We're also doing a study on specifically on access to food, and that's some other researchers from our institute are going to be doing some research on access to food in tribal communities. So that's something that they'll be working on.
Okay, so access to food is interesting, and then are you tying in that transportation
Yeah.
component, right, with the access
Right.
to food?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. So yeah, that does sound interesting. I got another question here that was asked was there a distinction between fixed route service and on-demand service? Or did you combine both types of rides when you looked at transit?
Yeah. Like, so the data I showed was combined. It was both the fixed route and demand response.
Okay.
We have some data that differentiates that. And I think in this study, there are some tables that differentiate that. But as far as the livability case studies that we didn't differentiate between those two.
Okay, so you just kind of put it all in one. So,
Mhm.
and some tribes I know run pretty much just demand response. They don't really run much of a fixed route, right? So
Yeah, for the case studies we have conducted, it's pretty much demand response.
Yeah. Yeah.
all right. And check our time. I think we're getting near the end of our time because this is a lunch and learn. So we want to thank you to our speakers. Anybody else, if you have questions, you can always still send them to us even after the session. Something comes on your mind, you can send it to our information and we'll work to answer those questions. I'm going to just let you know that you can send your questions to nadtc.org. It's contact@nadtc.org. We'll get to it. So none of your questions will be out there unanswered. So if you got something, if we got something that we need to forward on to our speakers, we'll do that too. Is that okay with you? Both?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And if you want to look at more details and more graphs, there is definitely the final report. So
Okay. All right. So look at the final report, and we're all here for you. We appreciate the presentation. We'd like to thank you both. That's very interesting. And, as I hear that, and you think about livability and all those kinds of different connections, when I always think of tribal transit, a lot of times I start thinking, oh, weather will be such a big issue. But when you kind of looked on your numbers, that was not the huge issue because I think, around the tribes, they're just used to whatever is, Mother Nature brings on to them. So it's not quite the issue that sometimes I would have in my mind. So appreciate the presentation. Like to just thank also Carrie, who's on the back end of this, handling our presentation. We'd like to thank Rhonda also, who is our captioner. Good information. Want to let everybody get back to your day and appreciate your participation and consideration. So I think at this point, we'd like to conclude our NADTC Lunch and Learn and hope to have you back with us the next time we have an event. All right, take care.
thanks a lot, Ken.